Romance and dreams. So they say. I used to say it too. But ever since that day, the day of the murder, I've always associated my beloved Paris with death. I was at home having a bath when my editor called.
Collard, get your ass over to the Palais Royal now. You got an interview. With Pierre Carchon. Yes, the Pierre Carchon. No photos, so leave your gear at home. He asked for you personally. Don't ask me why. Anyhow, this could be big, so if he makes a pass, don't forget. Just smile, say yes, and keep taking notes.
So charming and so very apt. Pierre Carchon was a media king, a national hero, and one of the most infamous adulterers in Europe. He and his wife Imelda were just one step down from royalty. Whoa, I hate mimes, but unless you humor them, they don't go away. Here I was, the palace of the Media King and the Ice Queen. I pressed the doorbell and set in motion a chain of events which would change my life forever.
Yes? What is it?
Madame, my name is Nicole. I'm here to see Monsieur Carchon.
Come up, we're on the first floor.
Madame Carchon, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, I'm sure.
The Ice Queen was certainly living up to her reputation. Will you be staying for the interview?
Mademoiselle, I know little of my husband's business affairs, and I care even less. I certainly have no intention of watching him pore over yet another pretty little journalist.
Pretty? You're too kind, madame.
Ah, the talented and very beautiful Mademoiselle Collard. Such a pleasure to meet you at last.
Monsieur Carchon, I am honored.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
Call me Pierre, please. But I do not flatter you idly. I was a friend of your father. He was a great man.
My father? He never mentioned.
He and I were very close. And then his death. So tragic. I must... Imelda, your damned cat's in my study again. Another Ming vase, I suppose. Excuse me for one moment, my dear girl.
You journalists are getting younger each year.
Perhaps it's the rest of the world getting older, madame. That was no cat.
My God, what? Monsieur Carchon!
He's dead. I must call the police. You'd better stay here.
There was a man. It was the mime. Do you think he...
Well, I believe we can rule out suicide, don't you?
No wonder they called her the Ice Queen. She would have been top of my list of suspects if I hadn't seen the attacker myself. And if I hadn't come across a couple of murders just like this already. One of the most important men in Europe murdered. And here was I, Nico Coulard, alone at the scene of the crime. Should I wait for the cops? Or start my own investigation? It was a no-brainer. The bookcase was filled with obscure first editions. It contained rows of titles I didn't recognize. It contained rows of titles I didn't recognize. Mimes and guns don't usually go together, but I had an idea that this was no ordinary mime. I'd come across this murderer before, and written about him. The costume killer, at least that's what I'd called him. Some people hate searching corpses for clues. Me, I'm okay with it. Reminds me of an old boyfriend. In his pocket, I found a ticket stamped Bateau de la Conciergerie. Taking the ticket meant I tampered with the evidence. There was no going back now. Carchon had been shot. Carchon had been shot. Carchon had been shot. I closed his eyes. It was the least I could do for the poor fellow. I opened his eyes. Best to leave the crime scene as I found it. I closed his eyes. It was the least I could do for the poor fellow. I opened his eyes. Best to leave the crime scene as I found it. A bust of Pierre Carchon, humble servant of La France. Pierre Carchon again. His eyes seemed to follow me around the room. A small round piece of glass had been cut out of the pane. This was a professional job. I didn't want to cut myself and leave blood on the glass. Call me old-fashioned, but I like to keep my DNA to myself. Your original 18th century high-security window handle. The killer must have used a ladder to reach the window. He was long gone. Guess he folded that ladder up, popped it in his pocket and took it with him. The police could turn up at any minute. Somewhere there were clues to the murder, and I needed to find them. A medieval pageant. Original, no doubt. The tapestry must have cost a fortune. It was a tube of acrylic paint. French ultramarine. Just the color I was after for my bathroom.
I'm sorry, I have to go. Someone is...
Young lady, what are you doing? Oh, this paint. It's my favorite color.
For God's sake, keep the damn stuff.
The tube of paint from Imelda's easel. French ultramarine. I reckoned that cloth might just turn out to be useful. Even my fingernail wouldn't fit into such a small hole. There was a tiny hole in the tabletop. Part of the inlay had been chipped away. It was a boat ticket stamped Bateau. When I was a little girl, Papa used to take me on the Bateau Mouche as a treat. The tube of a fine Baroque door. It would look great in my apartment. The door was locked. The tapestry must... Excuse me, madame.
Yes?
Why would a mime want to kill your husband?
Pierre had plenty of enemies. Half the husbands in Paris for a start.
I am so sorry for your loss, madame.
No, you're not. You're a journalist. Journalists don't feel sorry.
Not true.
We shall see.
Why did your husband send for me? What did he want to discuss?
I have no idea. His business was his business.
He never told you anything.
No, and frankly, I preferred it that way.
How did your husband know my father?
I have no idea.
You didn't know him? Thierry Coulard?
Pierre knew a lot of people I didn't know, most of them women. This is quite a scoop for you. I suppose you're already inventing the headlines.
Just because I am a journalist.
Don't patronize me. You're all cut from the same cloth. Do you have any moral sense at all?
I certainly don't let it get in the way of a good story.
I admire your loyalty to your profession.
The police will be here soon, madame. Is there anybody you would like me to contact? Family, friends?
No, I have no family. Pierre and I were... He was all I had, really. Not much, was it? The dutiful wife. That was my role. He never talked, never let me in.
I know one thing, madame.
What?
If you want to find out who killed your husband, then you let me do the job, not the police.
Why? How do I know I can trust you?
Your husband invited me here today because he needed me. I think he knew somebody wanted to kill him, and he knew I could help.
I doubt it was your database he was after.
You're wrong. I was onto his killers already, I am sure of it. Please, you owe it to him.
I don't know.
All I need is a few more minutes to look around before the police come.
I think perhaps you do have a moral sense. Of sorts. You're not a very good liar, Nico Collard. And perhaps Pierre really did think that you could help. Of course it wouldn't have stopped him seducing you too. Here, take this. It's the key to the drawing room next to the library at the end of the hall. It was Pierre's room. I rarely went in there. I couldn't. I was too scared of what I might find.
Thank you. I promise you won't regret this. It was the drawing room key. The door was locked. The door was locked. Now we were getting somewhere.
painting showed the Cachons together, in love. As the poet said, the past is a different country. Or did I read that in a fortune cookie? The Cachons, noblesse oblige. The Cachons. This wasn't the time for me to lie on the sofa doing my Marie Antoinette impression, though it is very popular at parties, especially with gay guys. Don't ask me why. The sofa was antique. For one horrible moment, I had an image of a naked Cachon wriggling around on it with a young journalist. Oh. As expected, the desk was yet another priceless antique. Yawn. The blotter and in tray had clearly been placed with mathematical precision. I didn't need a sheet of blotting paper. Not while it was blank.
The paint would have just soaked into the blotting paper, but the idea was good. My heart skipped a beat. It was a carved elephant, but not just any carved elephant. It had been made by my father. I knew for certain because in my apartment I had its exact twin, carved into a box he had made. So Cachon had known my father. They really must have been friends. I decided to take the carved elephant. It clearly meant nothing to Imelda. It was the beautiful elephant my father had carved. I didn't want to take the tray, but I knew that I could use it. The in-tray, like everything else in this place, was beautiful. One day I was going to have an in-tray like that, even if I had to sell my apartment to pay for it. Locked. Not surprising, really. It didn't work, but I guess it would have been surprising if it had. This wasn't the time for me to... Though it is very... No. No. I didn't need the lights on. It was light enough already. Even the light switch looked impressive. There was the very faintest of clicks. Behind the picture was a safe. The safe was locked. I needed the key. The safe was It was the wrong kind of key. It was the beautiful elephant my father had carved. No. I didn't need a sheet of blotting paper. Not while it was blank. I'd spread blue paint over the bottom of the tray. It was ruined. I was a very bad girl, but also quite a clever one. I didn't need a sheet of... I didn't want to take the tray, but I knew that I could use... In a way, I was going back to art school. I'd ruined the tray, but I was on my way to solving a clue. No. 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 I didn't need a... No. No. I didn't... Pierre Carchon was stiff for the last time. I closed his eyes. It was the least I could do for the poor fellow. I opened his eyes. Best to leave the crime scene as I found it. A magnificent... Imelda had talent, but I certainly wasn't going to tell her that.
Did you find anything useful?
This carving, do you know anything about it?
It was Pierre's. What does the statue have to do with...
Please, I need to know.
He was given it by a friend, something to do with Africa.
He never explained any more.
No, but I think it was important to him, always on display. Why?
It was carved by my father.
Oh, I see. I didn't know.
Just one thing. I know this is going to sound strange, but did your husband ever mention... Did he ever talk to you about a penguin? Or a snowman?
What? I don't understand.
He never mentioned people dressed up as penguins.
Nico, I don't know what you're talking. My dear, you should go before the police arrive. There will be many awkward questions. I am grateful that you stayed. You've been so kind.
Please, call if there is anything I can do.
I'd misjudged her. She had every reason to be bitter, living with a guy like Carchon. From the sound of it, no one and nothing was safe around him.
Maybe I should have interrogated the cat after all.
Pierre Carchon was stiff for the life. It was one of my hair clips. My favorite, in fact. It must have fallen when I was knocked down. Aha! Nicole, you are just so damn good at this stuff. Instead of comforting Imelda, I was ransacking her flat. Why? Because there was something going on here, and I had to get answers before the cops arrived. And hey, she'd been rude to me, so she had a key. Maybe a safe key. In the safe was some kind of artifact. There were strange symbols on its surface. It looked like the printer's blocks I'd made at art school. If there was one thing I'd learned about symbols, they are always important. But these symbols scratched into stone were impossible to read. I needed to find a way of printing them. At least the stone was round. But what could I use for ink? And what could I print on? Sure, I was stealing, but I knew Imelda didn't know about the artifact, and Carchon was past carrying. The artifact was like an old printer's block, covered in symbols. I rolled the artifact in the paint until it was completely coated. The cylinder was covered in... I needed to work out... Genius! The roller and the paint worked just as I planned, but what did it say? It was some kind of coded message. It read, sub judice. I may not have learned a lot as a journalist, but that was a term I knew well. It means a legal case that is before the courts. Below it was a sequence of letters that made no sense. I suddenly realized there was a connection between the boat ticket and the coded message. The boat ticket was stamped Bateau de la Conciergerie. The Conciergerie on the Ile de la Cité, by the river, housed the ancient law courts. So, sub judice could in this case mean literally under the law courts, below the Conciergerie. I was pretty sure I'd found all I could here. And besides, all this opulence was making me pine for my regular life of poverty. This was a huge story. It was also one heck of a puzzle with a lot of pieces missing. But I was going to crack it. And if I could just remember the name of that fancy prize you get for being an ace journalist, I was definitely going to win it this time.
Imelda, I will do everything I can to find the killer.
Thank you, my dear.
And if the police ask...
Don't worry. You were never here. Sub judice was the key. I was going to have to find a way under the conciergerie. I decided to head straight for the quayside on the Ile de la Cité. If there was a way of getting under the conciergerie, it would have to be from there.
Carchon wasn't the type for messing about on the river. He was up to something down here. Something that got him killed. An old boyfriend of mine owned a barge once. Dampest relationship I ever had. In every way. The fence wouldn't move. It was the old boathouse for the conciergerie. If I was right about the meaning of sub judice, then the answer had to lie somewhere here on the quayside. This fence was a permanent fix. I tried pushing the fence, but it wouldn't move. A strange pair of locks stopped the latches from releasing the gate. I wasn't leaving yet. For a room full of junk, that was one very sophisticated lock system. This place was definitely fishy, in more ways than one. Oops. Moving the skiff would only damage it more. I'd wrecked the skiff. Not that it was particularly seaworthy anyway. Moving the skiff would only damage it. No handle, nothing obvious. But there had to... It was almost as if the fence was intended to double as a bridge. I really didn't want to pull the fence back up and risk trapping myself in this place. Moving the skiff would only damage... I wasn't. It was the old boat. This fence. The cross looked familiar. I'd seen it before. It was embroidered on the lace cloth I'd picked up at Carchon's apartment. I knew I was on the right track. The cloth was embroidered with an unusual symbol. The artifact was like an old printer's block, covered. No handle, nothing obvious, but there had to be a way to open it. No handle. A rough hole was cut into the pillar. Mystery solved. Carchon's stone cylinder slotted into the hole with a satisfying click.